If you were to scroll down to the bottom of my channel, the oldest public video of mine is Mario Kart 9 Retro Track Predictions, published July 15th, 2014. But this video is obsolete. This isn't because of rookie experience levels or any flaws in my logic at the time. No, this is because the video was created in a different era. An era where everything made sense, and nothing does anymore. The Mario Kart series appears to be in the beginning of a new era, and with that comes a lot of new questions. We will tackle those shortly, but to start, here's how I would describe the series at large. We started off with what we now call the classic era. This consists of all the oldest games with their older quirks. They had the strongest emphasis on driving and were the hardest games for beginners to pick up. They mostly can be played on Nintendo Switch Online. They had lives in their GP mode and consisted of only new courses. The first two games seemed to be improved upon directly by the next two games, and in the big picture, their main purpose was just to establish the series and have a big emphasis on local multiplayer. Double Dash was the start of the transition, having things like unlockable characters in land mode. Next comes what I'd call the accessibility era. This consisted of the games where the popularity of the series exploded. Online play allowed people to play against people around the world, and these games adopted much easier controls and had a greater focus on item usage and races. This era also introduced retro tracks how we know it today, and that will be the main topic of this video. For 4 straight games, we got 16 retro tracks alongside the 16 new courses of each game. These retro courses were never repeated in later games. This made the idea of predicting the next game simpler also because a formula was established. Every track in the series would of course have a debut game, and then a game where it returned as a retro. In a world full of downloadable content and games that demand more content in general, this formula was never going to last forever, and we have now arrived at the point where we have to make some sense of a nonsensical new world. My final predictions in the 2014 video are very cute looking back. There's of course Cheeseland, a track that would return to MK8 less than a year after the video, and there are tracks that return through the booster pass on the list as well, and even tracks that weren't in Mario Kart 8 but were remade in Mario Kart Tour. And speaking of Mario Kart Tour, what exactly is it? Is it main series? This has been a hot point of contention amongst the commenters on this channel, so we'll answer that soon. Funnily enough, I thought I did have the answers at one point in time, so I decided to remake my retro predictions video. The date this time? February 9th, 2022. The day that the booster pass was revealed. Now, the original 8U DLC certainly was a disruption in the formula. There were 3 tracks that got second-time remakes, which broke the established rules, that being Yoshi's Circuit, SNES Rainbow Road, and Baby Park. But these courses all kind of had a special quirk about them that made them feel more of an exception rather than the rule. But when the booster pass was revealed, showing off Coconut Mall, Choco Mountain, and Sky Garden, while announcing 5 more similar waves in the process, something became very clear to me. We are living in a new era of Mario Kart, and I'm going to call this the content era. Are the games in this era even main series? Well, I don't actually know, but we've got to play the hand we've been dealt. A lot of people are out there still making MK9 predictions like it's 2014. I don't want to rain on any parades, but we can't really do this anymore if we're actually trying to predict the future of the series, because nothing is predictable anymore. I don't even think it's reasonable to predict that the game's going to be considered the 9th Mario Kart, and even if it is, I doubt it would be called Mario Kart 9 to begin with. So if that's the case, what even is the 9th Mario Kart? Is it Deluxe? Well, it's kind of hard to consider it that when it still has 8 in the name. And what is Mario Kart Tour exactly? Longtime watchers will know that I am reluctant to call Tour the 9th MK game, and that isn't meant to be a shot at the game or anything. Fundamentally speaking, it's just different than the rest of the main series. It just plays by an entirely different set of rules. To start, it's based on 2-week cycles, and I'm sorry, but I can't consider a game that doesn't have a Mushroom Cup to be main series. But in many ways, especially compared to the arcade titles, it does kind of feel like it's a main series game. When thinking about it more, I came to a conclusion. Mario Kart Tour is pretty much just the equivalent of Pokemon Legends Arceus. Pokemon Legends Arceus was a spin-off game for the Pokemon series made by the same developers as the main series that coincidentally came out after the Generation 8 main series games. Both it and Tour consist of mostly retro content with some new, and we don't expect the new content to necessarily travel to the new games in the future, but it certainly feels possible. In many ways, the games felt a little lazily made, there were some cut corners, but they were both undeniably pretty fun once you got into it. Legends Arceus did also have an impact on the gameplay of the generation to follow. Likewise, Tour spawned the Booster Pass, having a ripple effect on the most recent Switch entry in the series as well. So my thought is, Tour is kind of its own thing, but you can't really tell the story of the series without it now. This game also had more tracks and characters than any other game in the series, even before variations were added, and in a sense, it is the perfect game to describe this new content era. It might have been the necessary game to really bring the new era into form. Now, I always theorized that Mario Kart was underselling us on the content department. I felt that having only 30 characters was silly in 2014 and that it can't possibly be that difficult to make more. It's not like making a Smash character where each one has a distinct moveset that must be balanced with all the other characters. These characters more or less play the same, with some different stats, voice clips, and animations. That's about it. This take aged really well for me. Turns out, the only reason why they didn't have 100 characters before was because they didn't have profit incentives to put in that effort. Tour being a bit of a gacha game created incentives to make more and more content. There needed to be characters that people didn't have, with advantages on new tracks that not everyone would be able to have as well. And with all these new tracks, it became really easy to create new paid content for the install base of 50 million people who already had Deluxe on their Switch. Essentially, mobile gaming forced their hand to make profits in the short term, and as a result, Deluxe now has 96 tracks. But now we arrive to a fun point in time. All of Tour's content has been unveiled, and they are going to have to make a follow-up to Deluxe eventually. If you want to predict Mario Kart X, or whatever the game will be called, to have 32 tracks of 16 retros, be my guest. But that is going to be an incredibly tough sell to anyone who owned Deluxe, and that makes me think that predicting like it's 2014 is no longer really reasonable. A more reasonable thought for me is that the next base game has a 24-24 split with 48 tracks total, and maybe it's even more than that. Of course, that game must also have DLC, because that's just what the industry is now. But what's funny to me is even if we came to a consensus on how many retro tracks the next game will have, everything is still kind of unpredictable, because we have no idea what tracks are and aren't even eligible to make the cut. I will do a follow-up video at some point and make my actual predictions, but that will not be today. Instead, the meat and potatoes of this video is discussing eligibility, which I find surprisingly to be even more interesting than the predictions themselves. So anyway, let's talk about every type of Mario Kart track we have going into 2024 and what the future might hold for each. The easiest starting point consists of two major categories: non-remade courses and remade courses. This is pretty self-explanatory, and this was really the only criteria we had in the past to determine the eligibility of retro tracks. It would of course be a massive assumption to say that this still matters in 2023, since we're frequently seeing previously made courses getting more opportunities to return, but I do think it matters to some extent. I've said it before, but I think there is evidence that Nintendo still wants to bring back every track in the series. I also think that tracks that have never been remade before returning is a big deal. I think every track is someone's favorite. Even the less popular ones still have their staunch supporters, and I don't think Nintendo wants to leave anyone out to dry. If Nintendo just brought back every popular course in the Booster Pass, it surely would be hard to top that effort later down the road, so as such, I think they've been patient. You would think that 4 games into the retro track experiment that they would have chosen all the best ones by now. Yet when I look at the remaining courses yet to be remade, I still see a lot of fan favorites. It appears to me that they've been sitting on these tracks with an intent to invest in the future, and while many people impulsively wanted to see all of them back in the Booster Pass, Nintendo's played the long game here. The exciting thing is, though, is that future will eventually come. So to me, I think that the distinction between remade and non-remade courses is still important to talk about when we discuss eligibility. In the past, the pool of eligible courses that had never been remade stayed at a healthy 72. I think this is a pretty good number because it gave really everything a reasonable chance to return without really making it too predictable. Why 72? Well, the first 4 games had 72 total courses, and each game after introduced 16 and remade 16, so it makes sense that it stays at a steady 72. Because of Mario Kart Tour and the Booster Pass introducing significantly more retro tracks than original courses though, that list of 72 has fell quite a bit. Looking at only tracks outside of Deluxe, there are just 21 that have never been remade in a future Mario Kart now, not counting the SMK tracks that had their anomaly reappearance in Super Circuit, because I think that was clearly a bit of a one-off thing. So if I wanted to make a prediction with 24 non-remade tracks, I wouldn't have enough to do that using this list. But luckily the list doesn't actually end here, because there are other easy classifications. We have 16 Wii U courses that have also clearly never been remade yet, alongside 64 tracks that were used as retro tracks starting from MKDS onwards. And this is starting to look reminiscent to what we were expecting the original MK9 discussion to look like, except the category with 21 we were expecting to have 56. But then the Wii U DLC came out. This added 16 additional courses, oddly consisting of 9 new tracks and 7 retros, and this was the first instance of conventional wisdom being broken. Of course, what also broke that system was the fact that 3 of these 7 DLC retro tracks were tracks that had already been remade in the past. So we've now counted 46 non-remade courses, along 68, not 71, remade ones. This gives us a grand total of 114 tracks we've accounted for now. Now for series veterans, you would know that if you searched randomly in the YouTube search bar top 145, it was commonly followed by Mario Kart courses. So what happened to the other 31 if we only have 114 right now? Well, they're in a kind of strange spot. These 31 tracks were all remade in Mario Kart Tour, and of those 31 tracks we can make two classifications. A fortunate 15 came back to the booster pass, while an unfortunate 16 did not. So now adding things up, we got 46 non-remade courses and 99 remade ones, that totals to 145, so it checks out. But now we get into the really tough discussion. What do we do with the new tour courses? Have they been remade yet? I don't think we can definitively answer this. They might be considered remakes in Deluxe, but they also might be considered to be the main series debut for these courses. This is actually a really interesting debate because practically every tour track is in Deluxe, a game that is actually older than Tour. Luckily for us, this is a one-way conversation since none of the Wii U tracks we've already listed have returned in Tour though. But even if we had the answers to these questions, there is still some additional complexity discussing the Tour tracks as well. This is because there are two types of Tour courses. Tour cities, and what I like to call Tour originals. One of the funny things making this conversation even sillier is that some of these Tour originals actually came to Deluxe before Mario Kart Tour. As such, the community can't seem to agree on whether or not these tracks should be labeled as Deluxe tracks or Tour tracks. But anyways, I think we finally reached the interesting part of the video, because I've laid out all the facts now, and everything after this point is simply conjecture. So here is what I think on the matter. I believe all 14 Tour cities are going to be considered as remade in Deluxe, and that they will not be returning in the next game. I won't rule them out completely, of course, or especially in its DLC, or forever for that matter, but as far as my predictions go, I don't think any of them will be in the base game for the next Mario Kart. This is because they specifically have the Tour prefix in Deluxe, which has historically always been an indicator of a retro course, and to me, this makes sense, because I don't anticipate that there would be more than 6 Tour courses in the base Mario Kart 9 game, and that's on the assumption that there'd be like 24 retro tracks total as opposed to 16. I think it would be really awkward to bring back like 3 city courses only of the 14. To me, cities feel like the type of gimmick where it's kind of all or nothing. Without the rest, 1 or 2 cities would feel really out of place in a retro selection, and this opinion feels validated when considering the effort that they made to ensure that every single one would be in the booster pass. All of them are technically accounted for as such, even though many people were critical of their overabundance in the booster pass. Like I said regarding Toad Circuit in my last video, their presence in the booster pass might be the reason none of them are in the next game to begin with. Another reason why I believe this to be the case is that they have classified the Tour original tracks differently, even in Deluxe. Now I know many people will say Yoshi's Island is a Switch track, but here's what I think. All of these Tour originals were clearly built for Mario Kart Tour. If Tour never existed, they wouldn't have put these courses in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And if they were always going to make them, they would have just saved them for the next Mario Kart. But now that they do exist, they can choose to classify them however they want. And interestingly, none of them have a prefix in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and that includes the 3 that were first playable in Tour before Deluxe. Maybe this is all coincidental. Maybe they purely wanted the Tour label to be for the cities since that was the theme of Mario Kart Tour. But I think there might be something deeper going on here. While these tracks have all objectively been put into more than one game, I do not think that they will be treated as being remade already. I think they will be treated as Switch courses or even NS courses perhaps. Because if you think about it, the Switch is a major part of Nintendo's history now. It would be weird if there weren't any Mario Kart courses classified as Switch tracks to begin with. This would give them a way to pretend that there were Switch courses in the future. It's almost like a cop-out for just making a port for their main Mario Kart game on a popular system, instead of actually rebuilding one from scratch. Regardless of what happens, I will always call these courses Tour Originals, of course, because logically that's what they are. The only way I will ever fold on this idea is if they call Yoshi's Island a Switch course, but also Ninja Hideaway a Tour track. I think that they will be matching though in the future, and my guess is that they're just going to be considered Switch tracks because of the lack of prefix in Deluxe. 6 tracks is still a pretty small amount though for one console. It would also imply that these tracks have a heightened chance of immediately being remade in the next game. But I also have another kind of crazy thought. Instead of 25 Wii U courses and 6 Switch courses, what if they decided that there were just 16 Wii U courses and 16 Switch tracks? As mentioned earlier, there were 9 original tracks in the Wii U DLC. However, none of these tracks were immediately playable with just a Mario Kart 8 disc back on the Wii U. On a Deluxe cartridge, however, no matter how old, they came with any purchase. And if you add in Piranha Plant Pipeline if you want, suddenly you have a list of 16 courses you could technically classify as Switch tracks. Now, I don't really see this as what will happen, especially with Pipeline, but there is an outside possibility in my mind here. But with that said, what exactly is Pipeline? It is a tour original, that's very clear, but it's not a city. Unlike Cove, its layout doesn't even resemble a city, and it's not playable on the Switch. So what do we make of this? Well, my best prediction is that there will be more than 16 original courses in the next game, but one of the quote, new tracks might be Pipeline, and it will get the prefix of the Switch 2 or whatever the console is called down the road, and the track will surely have some nice tour references in it. I think Pipeline not being in Deluxe might actually insinuate that all the tour originals will be used in the future as well. I just can't see a world where an officially released track is just lost to time. So when considering the suspicious lack of tour prefixes even for tracks like Ninja Hideaway, and the general popularity of these tracks to begin with, I do expect that they will be eligible for the next game. I guess I should technically bring up the RMX Courses and Tour as well. I can't say I think they'll bring these tracks back. You know, they chose to remake Mario Circuit 3 a second time in the Booster Pass over RMX Mario Circuit 1, and it still seems they have plenty of SNES tracks to choose from anyways. All in all, I still low-key feel like the most likely time to see these tracks return might be in a Mario Kart level designer type of game like Mario Maker using the SMK tracks as templates. Pretty much, I kind of felt like I had to acknowledge their existence, but as far as the rest of our conversation goes today, I just don't really see them as much of a factor. So to summarize everything up to this point, our list consists of 52 non-remade courses, 113 remade ones, and one course that kinda just lies outside the boundaries to begin with. Now in the past, this would mean that our pool of eligible retro courses would sit at 52, down from 72, but I would also argue that not all the second time remakes are created equal. Of course you have the 64 tracks that were already remade in DS through the original MK8 that I would say are probably least likely to be eligible in the base game for the next game. I think the reasons for this are self-explanatory, though I think the ones that returned in Wii, and especially DS, are the most likely of this group to get consideration again. That I think would maybe potentially happen for like the N64 tracks in this situation, since they're almost out of 64 tracks to use. If there were like 24 retro courses, perhaps they might consider a repeat 64 track in that situation. The 4 tracks that were also first remade in the 8U DLC I think also won't be eligible in the next game. That includes Cheeseland, Ribbon Road, Wario's Gold Mine, and Neo Bowser City. And with that said, that now brings us to the tour courses. To me, the fortunate 15 are in the same boat as these 8U DLC tracks. They were courses that originated in one of the original 7 Mario Karts and now have undeniably appeared as a retro track in what is universally agreed to be a main series entry. I've said many times before that Toad Circuit and Snowland would not have been DLC tracks if they were going to remain eligible for games after this one, and that is something I don't plan to change my opinion on now. The unfortunate 16, however, I think are the more interesting tracks to discuss here, because perhaps they won't actually have an unfortunate fate. Yes, they were remade, but I could see a timeline where that's ignored. This is of course because we don't actually know if Mario Kart Tour really counts as being main series. One could of course argue that the presence of tour prefixes in Deluxe proves that it is, but on the other hand, if tracks like the Fortunate 15 returned in Tour, and that counted as being a main series remake, why would they also be remade in Deluxe? Because some of these tracks were not very popular to begin with. If a Tour remake truly counted as the track's main remake, why did we see Toad Circuit a second time? I really don't think it would have also returned in Deluxe. So what do I think? Well, my gut is saying that the tracks that have only ever returned in Tour should effectively be categorized as non-remade courses. This would increase the pool of non-remade tracks back up to 68 and quite close to the original 72, and create a much more balanced pool in the process, since previously half of our tracks in this category were Mario Kart 8 tracks. This prior imbalance was much larger than just being focused on Wii U courses too. In the 52, the only 3DS tracks that were left on the board were Woohoo Loop and Maka Woohoo. I've got to ask, why was this the case, and would this mean that they would choose both for the next Mario Kart? Well, this is kind of a strange thing to talk about. The Woohoo tracks were obviously unique courses because they were tracks that referenced the world outside of the Mario world, and when Tour came out, there was a heavy emphasis on porting Mario Kart 7 tracks over to that game. These 2 tracks ended up being the only 2 from that game, retro tracks included, to not be added to Tour. So was that intentional? Well, I think it's incredibly possible. There's a large part of me that wants to consider if, like the Tour cities, tracks like these would kind of be exceptions that are supposed to just kind of be one-offs. Would it be weird if just one of them came back? Well, perhaps not, because 3DS Woohoo Town actually came back alone as a battle stage in Deluxe. This makes me believe that they would remain eligible at the very least. With that being said, I also think it would be weird if they were the only 3DS options for the base game of the next game. So adding tracks from the quote unfortunate 16 like Shy Guy Bazaar, Daisy Hills, Wario Shipyard, etc. back to the mix kinda feels right to me. However, there is another category of courses I think we have to talk about here as well. The other Nintendo-themed courses from Mario Kart 8's original DLC. That would be Mute City, Big Blue, Hyrule Circuit, Animal Crossing, and Excitebike Arena. In theory, these tracks are exactly like the Woohoo trio, but they do seem slightly different, and the reason comes back to the very idea of our eligibility discussions to begin with. Since its inception back in 2014, Mario Kart DLC has always played by looser rules and guidelines than the base games have. For instance, base game retro tracks have always consisted of non-remade courses, while DLC retro tracks have been a mix of both non-remade courses, alongside the popular fan favorites that everybody wants to return more than once. And it kinda makes sense, because DLC's extra content. People can already get their Mario Kart fix by buying the regular game, but DLC needs a little bit of extra spice to get people to spend extra money in my mind. And this is why I think the original Mario Kart 8 DLC made tracks like Excitebike and Big Blue, and introduced so many characters that we previously never thought could be in Mario Kart. So to me, Mute City is a DLC type of track clearly, and I understand that you could make the case that the Woohoo track should fall into the same category, but weirdly I kinda feel like despite this distinction, they do make a little bit more sense to be in a base game. This is partly because they're kind of the home tracks for the Miis, and even if Miis are technically outside characters, I think they are clearly different than, well, Link is. The Legend of Zelda is a completely different series to Mario. I know that Miis are technically from a different series too, but Mario kind of falls under the Nintendo umbrella that Miis exist in, and because Miis mainly just exist as a way of representing the player, they feel like a more natural fit in Mario Kart than Link as such. Of course, there's another elephant in the room, which is Rob in Mario Kart DS. He looks like a DLC type of character too, but what I will say here is that Rob has always been more of a cameo character than really his own thing in series. He attaches himself to other games and always kinda has. So even if it was a really weird thing to happen, I won't deny that at all, it oddly feels like he's more suited to be a base game character than Link as well. Now I get that these opinions can kind of be subjective, so you don't have to agree with me on all of this, but to summarize, here's what I genuinely believe on all the up for debate questions. Tour cities can be classified as non-remade or remade really, but with how they treated them in the Booster Pass, they feel like a one-off gimmicky type of thing that I think will result in them being ineligible for the next game. I think we'll see the tour cities as kind of an era in time because I don't think they'd only bring back a handful of them, and it kind of seems all or nothing to me, and considering that there's 14 of them and they aren't super popular to begin with in Deluxe, I think the Booster Pass was their time in the spotlight. I believe that the 5 Wii U DLC tracks outside the Mario universe will also be ineligible for the base game. These tracks would be perfect to hold on to if they went the Nintendo Kart direction, but I do not think that that will happen in the next game. Like I said in the last video, if they were ready to move in that direction, we probably would have got all remaining Rainbow Roads in the Spiny Cup of the Booster Pass as a final celebration to the Mario Kart era, but perhaps these Wii U DLC tracks would be on the table as future DLC though. The 4 more traditional Wii U DLC tracks, like Dragon Driftway, Ice Ice Outpost, Wildwoods, and Super Bell Subway, will remain eligible alongside the Tour originals, which will potentially be seen as Switch originals. This is mainly because 1 or 2 of them could naturally fit in as a retro track in the future without standing out in any weird way. I do believe that Woohoo Loop and Maka Woohoo will be on the board still, not necessarily picked, but on the board, because Miis feel like a natural part of the Mario Kart series as opposed to being a DLC type of gimmick. I think that being a first-time retro will still be important for the base game, and an eligibility requirement like the prior 4 games. This will still bring in a steady flow of solid tracks that have been out of the spotlight for a while now. For reasons stated earlier in the video, I kind of see Tour as a very relevant spin-off. As such, I see Tour Retros as eligible retro tracks, unless they were in Deluxe. Finally, this game will have DLC, because the industry and guaranteed sales of a new Mario Kart practically requires it. And for this DLC, anything goes to bring in more money. So for all the previously remade tracks that were snubbed from the Booster Pass, this in my opinion is the time to bring them in, not in the base game. This is because for the base game, we already have a pool of 63 eligible retro tracks to predict from. This is slightly less than the original 72 we had, but it's still more than plenty. This includes 10 SNES tracks, N64 Wario Stadium, 6 GBA tracks, 4 GCN tracks, 3 DS, 5 Wii, 8 3DS, 20 Wii U tracks, and 6 Switch/Tour originals, and 7 if you count Piranha Plant Pipeline, which I think might be brought in as a new course to begin with. So make it 64 pre-existing tracks total. Originally, we had 25 of 52 remaining labeled as Wii U tracks, so I think 16 of 63 or even 20 of 63 will just feel like a much better balance here. And I could definitely see them pulling 24 from this list as opposed to just 16. And maybe the N64 tracks will reset in the process if they want to choose to. But I'm not going to predict that, and I guess that will be found out at a later date. Of course, these are just my guidelines, and you don't have to agree with my process here, but this is what feels most logical to me, and was worth discussing in a standalone video. The rules are no longer obvious, and I'd like us to be rational about how we go about retro track discourse in the future, and maybe this will help influence the discussion. When I do eventually come out with my next retro track prediction video though, these will be the rules I follow, and the ones I will reference to start the video off. If you have any counter arguments though, please tell me. I'd love to hear them, and perhaps I'll even agree and update my opinion if you make a good case. But for now, thanks for watching, and if you liked the video, make sure to give it a like. If you hated it, well, I still see the thumbs downs. Let me know. Catch you all next time, and have a good day.